At last, Robb Stark and Margaery Tyrell arrived at Winterfell, though the castle was but a shell of its former self, burned and pillaged by Theon Greyjoy's men. The walls were blackened, the great keep partially collapsed. Grief and fury mingled in Robb's heart as he walked through the ruins of his childhood home. Margaery stood beside him, her face soft with sorrow, her hand slipping into his. In that moment, many Northmen who witnessed their quiet unity realized that their king and queen had truly become one in purpose, bound by war and by mutual respect for each other's strength. Reconstruction began immediately. Workers cleared the rubble, masons drew up plans. Under the watchful eyes of the direwolf banners, the first seeds of a new era were sown. The combined influence of the North and the Reach brought fresh trade routes. Lumber from the Wolfswood mingled with stone from quarries in the Reach to rebuild walls. The farmland in the South fed the workers laboring in the cold North. Ties between lords from both regions deepened, as they corresponded about shipping routes, orchard expansions, or even arranged marriages between minor houses. The foundation of something extraordinary began to form, a real alliance that was more than just a treaty on parchment, but a melding of cultures. The free and independent kingdom in the North aligned with the wealth and power of the Reach. In time, Margaery grew used to the northern winters, layering herself in thicker furs, organizing feasts in the half-repaired Great Hall, encouraging the singing of northern ballads and the telling of old legends. She insisted that the famed gardens of Highgarden could inspire new plantings in Winterfell's courtyards, though they would have to choose hardy northern plants. Lady Olenna, who visited from time to time, declared the whole idea hopeless. Roses in the north, ha! But Margaery took it as a challenge. Little by little, small patches of color began to appear around Winterfell's gray stone, hardy blossoms that signaled something new blossoming in the realm. Of course, not all was idyllic. The scars of war ran deep. Many northern houses had lost fathers and sons. The tension with the Freys still simmered, an unresolved threat. Reports arrived occasionally of Lannister loyalists conspiring in the west. Even the Tyrells faced the possibility of discontent among certain vassals who had once been reluctant to break from the Iron Throne. And far beyond the borders of Westeros, across the narrow sea, rumors swirled of Daenerys Targaryen and her 3 dragons. Some said she meant to return to reclaim the Iron Throne. If that day came, it would test this fragile new order. But for now, the king in the north and his Tyrell queen focused on healing their war-ravaged lands, forging a stable future, and rooting out any remnants of Lannister aggression. Time passed, allowing people to reflect on the strange chain of events that had led to the unthinkable. House Tyrell siding with House Stark instead of the Iron Throne after Renly's death. Small folk marveled at the random twist of fate, or perhaps the cunning of the Queen of Thorns. In hindsight, it made sense. The Tyrells valued survival and prosperity. Renly's cause had perished with him, and Stannis offered little in the way of warmth or compromise. The Lannisters, for all their gold, carried a legacy of treachery that could not be forgiven or trusted. The North, meanwhile, had a king who had proven himself honorable, cunning, and victorious on the battlefield. Aligning with him spared the Reach from the worst ravages of war and placed them in a position of immense influence in the new order. It was a gamble that had, for the time being, paid off. For Robb Stark and Margaery Tyrell, their marriage was not the love story minstrels might sing of in simpler times, but it was no mere political arrangement either. Through campaigns and strategy councils, shared grief and tenuous triumphs, they had learned to trust each other. They built a relationship that balanced Robb's sense of honor with Margaery's political acumen. Each recognized their own limitations and strengths. Where Robb sometimes struggled with the finer points of negotiation, Margaery excelled. Where Margaery's southern upbringing left her uncertain of how to handle northern customs, Robb guided her. They found an equilibrium, forging a bond that many courtly marriages never achieve. In the quiet corridors of the partially rebuilt Winterfell, Margaery would walk with a hand on Robb's arm, discussing matters of state or minor disputes among their combined vassals. Sometimes they spoke of their families, she of her grandmother and brothers, he of his siblings scattered across the winds of war. They both carried that bittersweet ache of loved ones gone or missing. Perhaps it was that unspoken sorrow that drew them closer. The responsibilities of ruling weighed on them, and they found solace in each other's company, forging a gentle sort of comfort that replaced the illusions of romantic infatuation. The North saw it, and the people slowly gave their hearts to the rose who had come among them. Meanwhile, Lady Olenna, always watchful, spent part of the year traveling between Highgarden and Winterfell. She oversaw the lines of trade, ensuring that the flows of goods continued. She quietly tested the loyalty of the lords in the Reach, ensuring that their realm remained stable under Mace's nominal leadership, though all knew who truly pulled the strings. She welcomed alliances with lesser river lords, encouraging marriages that knit the realm together. Every so often, she sent pointed letters to Robb, filled with scathing wit and useful advice. She was never more satisfied than when she heard that some minor squabble had been settled in a way that benefited the Tyrell cause. Catelyn Stark, for her part, found a cautious kinship with Olenna. Though the two older women clashed in temperament, both understood the necessity of forging strong ties for the sake of their families. Catelyn admired how Olenna fiercely protected her blood, while Olenna had a grudging respect for Catelyn's sense of honor and devotion to her children. They shared tea occasionally, even exchanging a mild barb or two about northern gloom versus southern frivolity, but always parted on civil terms. As the months passed, the snows eventually came, blanketing the north in white. Marjorie witnessed her first true northern winter. She watched in awe as the lakes froze over, and the breath of men and horses turned to frosty plumes in the still air. She learned that travel became dangerous in the storms, that rations had to be portioned carefully, that the entire castle changed its rhythm to survive the cold. But she also discovered the beauty of a world turned silent and pristine, where the hush of snow absorbed all sound and the faint glow of the winter sun cast long shadows. She found herself drawn to the Godswood, where the ancient weirwood tree stood etched with a solemn face, the red leaves stark against the white snow. She would stand there sometimes, lost in thought, the swirling flakes settling on her hood. If Lady Olenna had seen her, she might have snapped a jest about the girl turning into a statue, but Marjorie found peace in the quiet that the old gods seemed to offer. Even in winter, the Tyrell supply lines were crucial. The Reach, less affected by cold, continued to send shipments of grain north, forging a new tradition of mutual reliance. Northern merchants, in turn, sent furs, timber, and iron south, where they were needed for the armies maintaining order around King's Landing. Though tensions remained, especially with the simmering threat of Walder Frey, the realm felt a tenuous stability as new roads were built and trade resumed. The people prayed it would last, though cynics whispered that peace could never truly hold as long as the Iron Throne remained in dispute. But for now, the scars of war needed time to heal, and the name of House Stark and House Tyrell commanded enough loyalty, or at least enough fear, that no immediate challenger arose. In King's Landing, the small council that Robb had assembled slowly reorganized the city's governance. Tyrion Lannister had vanished shortly after his father's capture, rumored to have fled overseas. Sansa Stark, freed from the Lannisters, returned to Winterfell under her brother's protection, though the horrors she had endured left her quieter and more guarded than before. A handful of lords from the Stormlands debated whether to follow Stannis or bend the knee to the new Northern Kingdom, unsure if the war was truly ended. Stannis, pride wounded, lurked in Dragonstone, refusing to yield but seemingly unable to strike. The Red Woman's shadows had failed to bring him final victory. Now he was a king in name only, overshadowed by the might of Stark and Tyrell combined. Over time, some Stormlords chose to align with the North or maintain a cautious neutrality, further isolating Stannis. Outside the Seven Kingdoms, threats loomed as well. The news of dragons in Essos reached even the cold walls of Winterfell. Marjorie's ladies gossiped about the silver-haired girl said to be mother of monsters. Robb paid it little mind at first, focusing on ensuring that the North was rebuilt and prepared for any next threat, be it from rebellious lords or from the rumored supernatural terrors beyond the Wall. Jon Snow, Robb's half-brother, had joined the Night's Watch. Sporadic reports trickled in about wildlings gathering under a king beyond the Wall, and other, darker tales of inhuman creatures stirring in the far north. But war-weary as he was, King Robb Stark could only address one crisis at a time. With the strength of House Tyrell at his side, he felt more confident that if the worst came, the North would not stand alone. Still, politics being what they were, the story was far from finished. Even as the snows began to recede and the first hints of spring touched the edges of the realm, new challenges loomed. House Bolton, ever pragmatic, had grown resentful of the Tyrell presence, whispering that the North was being corrupted by Southern softness. Some lesser reach lords complained that their taxes were too high, that the resources they funneled into the Crownlands or the North might be better spent in their own expansions. Walder Frey brooded behind the twins, waiting for the perfect moment to exact retribution for Robb's broken vow. Yet, in the hearts of the people, a sense of possibility existed. Here was something untried. A realm where the largest breadbasket of Westeros was linked with the most stoic and self-reliant corner. The marriage of the Wolf and the Rose had created a bond that neither the Iron Throne nor the cunning lords of older lines had anticipated. It was new, fragile perhaps, but brimming with potential. There were stories told at taverns across the land of the day House Tyrell and House Stark marched into King's Landing together, of the battered Lannister pride, of the crowd cheering the dire Wolf and the Rose. Minstrels composed songs about Queen Marjorie's kindness in the war camps and King Robb's unyielding courage on the battlefield. The small folk whispered that perhaps, in these two, they might finally have rulers who cared, even a little, for their well-being. Whether that hope was naive or not, it fed a spirit of endurance through the harsh winters and uncertain times. When at last Marjorie bore her first child, years after the war's end, there was celebration in both Winterfell and Highgarden. A child of the North and the Reach, a living symbol of the Alliance. He was given a northern name, in honor of his father's heritage, and a middle name from the Tyrell line. The day he was presented to the realm, lords from across the North, the Riverlands, and the Reach gathered in Winterfell's great hall to feast. Outside, the cold wind howled, but inside warmth spread through newly built hearths and generous amounts of arbor gold. Lady Olenna, though old, was present, wearing a triumphant smile as she declared that this child would unite the best qualities of Wolf and Rose. Catelyn Stark, tears in her eyes, saw in the babe a bridge between two worlds. Still, in the far corners of the realm, uncertain murmurs abounded. The Lannisters, though beaten, were not entirely gone. The Iron Islands seethed under Euron's chaotic rule. Dorne, quiet and watchful, might one day seek its own brand of justice or independence. The Vale remained locked behind the Ares gates, answering to none. And beyond the seas, dragons grew larger, and their mother yearned for her ancestral throne. The ravens carried news and rumor alike, each day bringing word of new plots. The future, as ever, was precarious in Westeros. But for the first time in living memory, the North stood strong and stable, with an abundant source of southern grain and a powerful new partner. House Tyrell had staked its fortunes on this union, and the seeds planted on the day of Renly Baratheon's death had grown into a formidable oak. Roots knotted deep in the cracks of the Seven Kingdoms' old order. And so, for a time at least, there was a measure of peace. Not a perfect peace, nor one unmarred by conspiracies and hidden vendettas, but a peace that gave the realm space to breathe. The blackened stones of Winterfell were rebuilt, the Red Keep was cleansed of the worst Lannister loyalists, and the farmland around King's Landing sprouted new crops under Tyrell's stewardship. Children grew up hearing stories of how the Wolf and the Rose turned the tide of war. Some dared to believe that this alliance might last, that the tragedies that had consumed so many might finally be put to rest. Whether such hope was well-founded or doomed to fail in the face of relentless ambition, only time would tell. Yet none could deny the monumental shift that had occurred. If House Tyrell had bent the knee to King Joffrey or joined Stannis in earnest, the war might have taken a different course. But they chose the young Wolf, forging a path that led to Tywin's downfall and the near collapse of Lannister power. They chose the battered but unbroken heart of the North, gambling that in its cold soil, new seeds could take root. And so far, they had been proven right. The Rose had found a new garden, and the Wolf had found a stalwart ally. Fate had played its hand, and the realm, for good or ill, had been reshaped by that decision. In winter and in war, time teaches that every alliance must be continually renewed, nourished by compromise and shared sacrifice. The king in the north and his queen from the Reach kept that lesson close, forging onward with eyes open to the dangers that still lurked. But for now, in the halls of Winterfell, where braziers burned bright and tapestries wove together the sigils of wolf and rose, one could almost believe in the promise of a better tomorrow. And in a place where the harsh winds howled outside ancient walls, that was no small thing.